Finding it difficult. All right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's get started. So welcome everybody to the Comic Arts Workshop. We've been doing this since June 2017. We have meetings about once a month. And lately we've been alternating between guest speakers and having some kind of discussion groups. So I think some of you have been to some of the discussion groups. The last one was about character, and then before that was about story, I think it was, or maybe it was the other way on, story and character. But anyway, so Dean is our latest guest speaker, and we are happy to have him. Dean is a very accomplished guy, and I keep saying that I'm going to come visit you at your studio in Gowanus. I was just there actually earlier today.
We moved to Red Hook about 2 years ago now, I think, literally 6 blocks away from the Gowanus studio.
You know, I was just driving through over the Gowanus, and there was traffic. And I didn't realize that some of those drawbridges still work.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
I
was wondering like what's going on, and then because I saw the structure where the bridge is supposed to be, I just thought it was like the top of the bridge, but it was actually the actual bridge raised up.
Yeah, it raised up. That's the Gowanus Canal, which is funny because that's where my entire COVID cop story takes place. This Kickstarter I've been doing for the last 3 weeks, that's going to end on like March 30th, takes place at Smith and 9th Street in Gowanus 10 years from now, basically.
I think we were on Union.
Yeah, and do you know that that's the tallest elevated subway in the world?
Oh, I didn't know that.
In the world, that's the tallest elevated subway in the world. Yeah.
The 9th Street station, or the 4th Street station?
Smith and 9th, that's right.
Got it. Okay. So anyways, let's get started. We'll talk more about COVID Cop in relation to Brooklyn. But again, everybody, thank you for coming. And like I said earlier, that we have this once a month. And well, we hope you enjoy our talk today. And make sure you have questions later, okay? So our first question is, Dean, can you tell us a little bit about your career path and your training?
I will, but I wonder what Rylis Jahamis is doing. He's making. Are they making faces? Are they?
I think that's a video. I think somebody. It's
That's not a real. That's not 2 people there right now.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually.
Oh well. Thank you for your contribution, whoever that is. So wait, what was the question? Like my career
path and training. Tell us a little bit about that.
Raymond, I heard
Hi, Char.
someone call me the F word and the hard R word.
Somebody called you the F word and the R word?
Yeah.
When?
A few hours ago. A few minutes
okay,
ago.
well, I hope you can deal with that, but we can talk about it after the event, okay?
Okay.
Thanks, Char. Okay, go ahead, Dean.
Well, I mean, I'm 55 years old, okay? Today, I would hazard that most colleges and schools teach at least a cursory understanding of how to make comics or read comics, right? But when I was a kid, we didn't have that. When I was a kid, you get comic books at the newsstand, right? Or in some cases in the suburbs, maybe your 7-Eleven or a pharmacy. And then at some point, the invention of the comic shop happened, right? Kind of around the same time that there were comic book conventions, but there was only a couple of comic book conventions. I didn't go to any of them when I was a kid, okay? So I started by reading comics, and in reading comics, I fell in love with them and wanted to make comics, right? So, but there wasn't any school, there was no training necessarily, right? Like they have today. And in fact, comics were shunned. Comics were like criticized and considered, power fantasies for 12-year-old boys, which they weren't totally wrong about. That's basically true. But I went from reading Marvel and DC comics to discovering the likes of Harvey Pekar, American Splendor, a guy from Cleveland, Ohio, that basically wrote about his life with other artists drawing his quotidian stories. And I also discovered a cartoonist named Chester Brown, who did a comic called Yummy Fur, okay? And what happened is I went from like deciding that, committing that one day I'm going to be a cartoonist and I'll pencil the Fantastic Four. That was a dream of mine at age 12, right? 2, realizing, wait, I can write and draw stories about my life, or I can create my own universes, kind of like what Chester Brown did in Yummy Fur with Ed the Happy Clown and other kind of psychedelic, bizarre stories. So it kind of opened up my mind and my trajectory. And I discovered in high school other friends who also read comics, and we created our own little comics club. In fact, I just wrote about it in my newsletter that I sent out, was it yesterday? With Josh Neufeld, who's another accomplished cartoonist who does a lot of nonfiction and journalistic comics these
I
days.
feel like it was 2 days ago.
Yeah, probably. And I interviewed him about when we were kids making comics in high school among our friends. And so you'd find your little posse, right? And you would just draw your versions of your favorite kind of characters or whatever. And it was mostly genre based, not a lot of autobio. And then at some point I befriended Larry O'Neill, whose father was Denny O'Neill, the legendary comic book writer and editor for Marvel and DC, well known for Green Lantern, Green Arrow, Batman, and Iron Man. And Denny got wind that there was a studio in the garment district of New York City called Upstart. And at Upstart, it housed famous cartoonist Howard Chaykin, Walter Simonson. Previously in the studio was Frank Miller, Jim Starlin, and Val Myrick. And there was another cartoonist named Jim Sherman who was in the studio. And then down the hall was another studio that housed Bill Sienkiewicz, Dennis Cowan, and Michael Davis. And Larry got a gig assisting Howard Chaykin on American Flag. And I was so jealous. I was like, come on, put my name in there. Like, I want to get in there and do some comics, right? And learn comics, because they weren't teaching comics at the art school. I went to music and art high school, and in my senior year became LaGuardia High School. And even though there's a lot of budding cartoonists, they frowned upon comics. They didn't think that was a serious medium, even though it's a multimedia medium, because of the fact that you have to write, you have to draw, you have to act, you have to think about behavior. There's coloring, there's sound effects, there's lighting, there's so many things that are involved in making comics. Anyway, I got a gig assisting Bill Sienkiewicz on New Mutants and Elektra Assassin. And
Wow.
Then I transitioned also.
Congratulations, you win.
Keep going. I've gotten pretty good at kicking out I guess on
people who really appreciate when an artist takes their time to talk to other artists.
Right,
yes,
exactly.
I understand.
Let's keep going.
Okay. Anyhow, I then I learned from Howard Chaykin, Bill Sienkiewicz, Walter Simonson. I worked on Thor. I worked on American Flag, and I'm 17 going on 18, and my mind is being blown because I'm working on these incredible comics and learning how to do comics by assisting, because they didn't teach that in school. Okay, we didn't have, like I said, these comic book colleges or these places that did that. I think there might have been, I think SVA, the School of Visual Arts, was maybe teaching, like maybe Harvey Kurtzman was there teaching some comics at some point around, around that time and later. And then
Congratulations,
the 80s or the
you
90s.
win a fat trip to Fatland.
No.
This guy.
Congratulations.
just bump this guy off the thing, right? Like,
Yeah, he's gone.
all right, good. Anyway, so then what happened? I took a couple of years off of high school and I didn't go to college, but I wound up going to college because and I got in for art at SUNY Purchase, where I met some other cartoonists. But I realized that because there wasn't a lot of skill sets in terms of teaching how to convey story through pictures, right? That I decided to transition into film. And even though film is its own thing, where we use moving pictures and sound and all that kind of stuff, I could steep in the idea of story. So I moved into film, and I was there's a little there's a whole other ecosystem happening here, right? That I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I I decided to take film. I loved making film. I love movies as is. I'm sure we all like TV and cinema, you know? But hold on one second. Hi, I'm on a workshop call right now. I'll have to call you back. Okay. Look, we're all getting interrupted here. It's life. Life is happening all around us right now.
Yep.
But and then I thought more about story, and then you have teachers that are, you know, making you think about, like, in movie editing, why would you go to the next image? Like, why would you cut from one thing and go to the next one? I started thinking in terms of panels the same way. Like in comics, you don't just go willy-nilly and just decide to draw whatever you want. How do you earn the next panel? How do you earn a pause? Why is it a splash page? Why is it a little panel? How many panels do you put next to each other? All these things we have to exploit the narrative real estate of the blank page. You know, I assume, is everybody here a cartoonist or drawing comics? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about? Like, you listen, when I worked with Harvey Picar and American Splendor eventually, what I was received, and I think maybe you've seen this if you know Harvey Picar's work, is that he would just draw a stick figure and then the dialogue that he wanted in the panel. And it was just that usually, right? Because the guy couldn't draw. And frankly, he left all of that, the visuals up to the artist, right? So sometimes certain artists would just draw Harvey's head talking, basically, right? Which I think gets a little boring after a while. So what I would do is I would read his story. And even though he had broken it down to panels, sometimes I would take one panel, I might break it down into 3, you know, because I had that latitude and that right, you know, because that's what was granted me. And I would think about, well, what is he actually saying? And what else can I be drawing that isn't just his face speaking, you know? So there might be a hand gesture, or you might put it in a certain setting, whatever. So you know, that was part of me training and schooling myself, right? By the act of actually creating comics. You know, after a while, you get kind of good at one thing, right? But then it gets boring when you just keep leaning on the same tricks of the trade that you hone. And that's one of the reasons why it's really good to collaborate. I don't know how many people here collaborate, or if everyone just does everything on their own. And I've come to a place in my career where I can do everything, and I have done everything. And it's challenging, and there's a lot of burden in that. But there's also something really cool about drawing a story that someone else wrote, or
Do
writing
me a
that
favor
someone
and
else
shut the
draws.
fuck up.
What's this?
No, I just got rid of him. He was another spammer.
Okay. All right, good. Wow, you what do these people do at night? Anyway, so
Some people have no lives.
it's wild. So anyway, so yeah, I think that answers your question, like what quote my training was, which was a lot of on the job learning. I always say that we grow up in public, right? A lot of the artwork I've done, or a lot of the work I've done over the years, I'm semi-embarrassed by when I look at it. You know, I cringe a little bit. I'm like, ooh, I could have drawn that better. But you had to get better, right? And we grow up in public, like, you know, and I'll go to a convention and someone will slap down a comic that I drew 20 years ago, and I'm like, to sign, and I'm like, oh my God. First of all, I don't even remember drawing it. And second of all, look how awful. I mean, for me, you know, but in a way, I also, if I do something, draw something today, and I'm okay with it, I'm happy with it, well enough, you know, a year from now, I want to be able to look back on this drawing I did and kind of cringe a little, and I would hope that it means I'm getting a little bit better, you know. That's the hope. And also don't forget, like when you're working for a publisher that has a deadline, it starts to become something called deadline art. It was something that John Romita Jr. once said, that all his art is deadline art. And you know, like if you were giving me a year to draw 24 pages, it would look very different from the month or two that you're often given to draw 24 pages. So don't forget that whenever you pick up a comic, or at least back in the day, you know, when they had these, like, it was like labor more than art, you know. And nowadays, you know, you'll pick up like a story arc drawn by an incredible artist, but they usually are just drawing 5 to 6 issues a year. You know, they're not doing the monthly grind. But then again, I don't know how many people here want to draw a comic, you know, or want to draw 12 comics a year, you know. I'm okay with just drawing 4 or 5 myself if I can get paid well enough. but I don't get paid well enough because I'm a freelance artist. I never became like the hot dog. I don't have my Watchmen or my Dark Knight Returns, like that makes me money while I sleep. I'm not Alan Moore, So I've had to find a different route through my independent career.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I hear you about what you're saying about, because really, I mean, working full time in the comics industry, especially in the mainstream comics industry, is quite a grind. Doesn't pay that much, right? So how would you describe, I guess, the situation you've created for yourself as far as doing comics work?
The situation I've created for myself, which is an interesting way of putting it, because I always say, if at best you can curate your life, and you can get to a place where, I remember the first time I said no to a job, and I couldn't believe it because it was like, I could say no. And it meant that I either had a job currently, or maybe I didn't want to do that job, because I've done jobs I didn't necessarily want to do, right? So, and then you can even see in the work that it wasn't my bag, my thing, right? But early on, you kind of have to say yes to everything if you want to try to be in the business, right? Especially if you're a freelancer, especially if you don't have a regular gig, right? So when you're working on one job, you're always hustling for the next two. It's like playing pool. You're shooting for the shot ahead of you, but you're trying to figure out where the ball is going to go to the other shot that you want to play, right?
You're setting up the next shot.
Exactly. You set up the next shot. And so, because I wasn't that good an artist, I realized that I wasn't going to get a lot of gigs. So I had to carve my own path, and thank God for the invention of the internet, because in a lot of ways, that was where I started to carve my own personal path, was when I was on the LiveJournal blogging platform, and I noticed that there were other artists as well that were posting images or some of their work. And I was like, why don't we get together, create a collective? And once a week, you do a serialized webcomic that could maybe be a graphic novel someday, right? And yeah, you're putting it out for free. You're investing a few free of your hours into making something, but you got to commit to it and show up every week until you have a finished story. And while I was working on other gigs that I didn't own, and other stories that were written by other people, that at the end of the day, I might just get like a little high five for drawing, right? I wanted to write and draw my own stories that I owned, and that's where I was able to do, like, on LiveJournal, and then we created this thing called Activate, and then we created a website, and then there was Friendster and Facebook and Twitter, all this other stuff, right? And then we actually have platforms like Webtoon and Tapas, right, where you can just upload your comics and hope for the best and try to promote it, but yeah, I think a lot of my trajectory was because I wasn't a good enough artist, and but I did have a lot of ideas that I wanted to express, and I didn't let that stop me from making the work. And again, growing up in public.
I would submit that it's that you were a good enough artist, but it's just that the way you wanted to draw was not the Marvel house style or not the DC house style.
And I tried. I really did. At first you try to ape what you love, right? I mean, you copy what you love. And then what they say, what they say what style is? Style is your inability to copy the thing that you love anymore and arrive at your own style.
Right. So, but I think the industry has changed in the sense that where it used to be that you had to, in order to get into the mainstream comics, you had to draw that Marvel or DC house style. But I think now, for people who don't draw that way, there's so many more opportunities to do work, right? And not just in the comic book industry, but in publishing and graphic novels, right? I think there's so many more. If you look at, I mean, the fastest growing segment of publishing is the children's market. And
right now, yeah, the YA market is the
right,
biggest.
and the kids don't care about work that's Marvel or DC house style
at all. No, today's market, like, so we're talking about how I grew up, right? But if you were to start today, the good news is that, and I'm not trying to downsize or downplay anything that Marvel and DC has done for the last 80 to 100 years or whatever it's been, right? but like you don't have to have read a Marvel comic or seen a DC comic or even know any of those characters, even though they're in your face because of television and cinema and merchandising and toys and everything else, right? I mean, I always joke, you want to read the next Marvel comic, just put on your TV. You know, that's what you got to do in the near future, if not already now. But yeah, you can just come up with your own idea. I mean, manga was very influential for a while, and it still is, you know. Memoir is a big thing more than ever. Soap opera kind of stories, romance, you know.
Right. It's completely opened up. It's funny because every once in a while I see a post among the comic book groups on Facebook about why is the industry dying, why is the industry disappearing, but people aren't taking into account that okay, maybe the superhero industry is not as good as it was, but the children's publishing industry, graphic novel industry is alive and thriving. But a lot of folks, I guess, they're stuck they're stuck with how they think a comic book should be, or what it should be, or what the
There is no
genre
should be. There never was a should be. Like it's the ebb and flow of the industry. I mean,
right.
like if you ever read Sean Howe's book, what was it called? Something about Marvel. If you read the book, he basically says in his reportage that about every 10 years that Marvel has ever existed, it was about to shut down. You know,
Yeah,
like it started in 61, was about to shut down in 70. I mean, it's had so, you know, it's somehow survived through innovation, you know. And I even wonder now, like when people glom onto the movies and the television shows, are they buying the comic books? I don't know, you know. I don't know.
I get the feeling that they're not. I mean, who needs to buy the comic book when you can watch the movie and the TV
I mean,
show?
basically, right? Although I do love comics, but I do think it's a good time for independent comics, you know.
I think so too.
I mean, more than ever, you know. So,
And not just for independent comics, but basically, I think that it's so easy to promote your work nowadays. I mean, you know, and publish it, right?
but this is the thing. It's easy to promote and publish. You know what the commodity is? It's not even money. It's your time.
True.
Think
Yeah.
about that. You know, my phone tells me like every few days or once a week how my average of hours I was on that phone, and I'm astounded how much I use my phone, right? Like, and not to make phone calls, right?
Right.
It's like, that's why I get mad when someone sees a movie and they're like, I want my 2 hours back. I'm like, you just spent 3 hours scrolling through Instagram. Like, and that's cool. But like, someone tried to make something, it may not have been, you maybe didn't like it, but don't say meh or like whatever. Like, respect the fact that a whole bunch of people tried to make something. Same thing with comics or a song or anything else. Like, you know, when you start to be a person that makes things, you start to respect every other thing that you know, to a certain level, right? You can not like stuff, you can criticize it, but ultimately you have to respect the fact that that time and effort went into that thing that you didn't like. You know what I'm saying? So,
Hey, Char, we're gonna save questions till the end, okay?
but if Char has wants to ask something now because it's relevant, I'm down to answer.
Okay, Char, go ahead.
You know,
What's your question?
keep it conversational. We need
You're
your voice.
muted, Char.
Char, put on your sound, man. Unmute.
I don't have a question, but I do have a suggestion
Okay.
for the future comic book artists and filmmakers and animators. If you know a movie's going to be that bad, or a comic book or a television series, what you can do is cut out some of the parts that didn't work, and sometimes the movie or the television series will make a great short form TV series, and the movie will make a great short film.
Well, you know what, Charlie, you bring up a good point. Editing is your friend. That is for sure. But what's also interesting is that what is good and what is bad is subjective. Like, in other words, Ramon and I can go see a movie together. Actually, I had this conversation last night with my friend Shannon. We were talking about the Banshees of Inisherin, whatever. And I loved it. And he was like, that's the worst movie he's ever seen. I'm like, what are you talking about? I thought it was really good, whatever. And it's just opinion at the end of the day, right? But I do think that in those formats that you're talking about, I do agree. I do think editing can be your friend. And when you can reduce things down, I've learned that a lot in my own crafting of story.
Okay, let me go to the next question. Even though this conversation I'm really into it. So you just mentioned earlier that COVID Cop was some parts of it were happening around the Gowanus Canal. And then Red Hook is named after the neighborhood you currently moved to.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
do you have a special affinity for Brooklyn?
You know, listen, I was born and raised in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, 79th Street and Broadway. And I moved to Brooklyn from a breakup where I was living at my girlfriend's place and she broke up with me and I had to find a place to live. And at the time, Brooklyn was a lot cheaper and there was a lot more available apartments. Now it's more expensive than Manhattan. Anyway, so I think I was turning 30 at the time. And I moved to Brooklyn, and as much as I loved New York City proper, there was just something about Brooklyn as a neighborhood, you know, like, and it was steeped in a lot of history. I moved to a very old Italian neighborhood at the time. Now it's gentrifying and changing, of course, like everywhere else, in Carroll Gardens. And I just felt like I found my heart in the soul of Brooklyn. You know, there was something about the
Start, do me a favor and keep that big fucking mouth shut.
Hold on.
Hey,
They're pretty
don't
big
do that
now, so
stuff
I don't
here.
know why it's like so big. It's fucking huge.
Did you get him,
Okay.
Ramon?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, every once in a while we'll have people who just come in and just, you know. And you were saying that you found yourself in the heart of Brooklyn.
Yeah, and I just felt like I got like, you know, I just felt like the shift in space was, I don't know, illuminating in some way. And then, you know, I tried to honor Brooklyn by, you know, doing memoir type stories. I did a comic for Zuda, which was a DC Comics web comics initiative. It's called Zuda, and I did a comic called Street Code, which was basically semi-autobiographical. It took place in Brooklyn. And then I just created a character, as you mentioned, the Red Hook, that represented, you know, parts of Brooklyn. And then I decided, oh, I'll have some fun with Brooklyn, and I'll start to create characters named out of neighborhoods and streets in Brooklyn as well, right? So I don't know if anybody here has read any of my Red Hook stuff, but you can read the entire 4.5 seasons that I've done so far at Webtoon. And Image Comics also published the first 2 volumes in print. And I'm hoping to maybe do an omnibus soon of that saga, which I'm calling like the New Brooklyn Saga or something like that. And then I have more Red Hook stories I want to do. But yeah, I mean, you kind of react and respond to where you are and what you know. You know, like if you go back to Marvel in 1961, 2 of the best things that Marvel introduced to comics, because you remember, if you ever read old Golden Age comics, you have very black and white bad guys and good guys, evil versus, you know, like, and it's kind of like just very standard, boring, like, you know, agendas, right? And what Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko introduced in 1961 were 2 things. They put their heroes in real places. So you got Spider-Man in Queens, Doctor Strange on Bleecker Street in the East Village, in Greenwich Village or whatever. The Baxter Building was in Midtown, you know, and they gave their heroes flaws so that we could relate to these like human beings, to these characters, right? And I think that when I was so attracted to that, that I was like, well, that's what we got to do in our work. That's how we can relate and connect to each other, is through flaws or dreams or mistakes or accidents. You know, we're complicated people, right? So we're not just good or bad. And that's why you got to give a lot of rope to a human being and have empathy, you know? And I think we can teach that a lot through our stories and comics.
I think so. You mentioned earlier that back when you first came out here, or when you were in school, there weren't a lot of comic book classes. So I teach visual storytelling, and I've taught the comic book class. And just last night I was talking about giving your character an unfulfilled need as part of their motivation.
Right? I mean, and then you hope you root for them to try to get that, you know?
Right, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
funny, you were saying something before about character and story, right? And the one thing I've learned when I've pitched, I've written a couple of pitches, like I co-wrote a TV show with an editor from DC Comics, a former editor from DC, and I've written a couple of my own things. And I do know that what television often is looking for, unless it's a mini series or a limited series, they're looking less for plot and they want more character. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but now I do. Character is the person you just want to follow whatever happens.
Right,
because you
right.
like them, right?
Once your audience falls in love with the character, they'll follow them through any story you put them
Any
through.
story.
Yeah.
So stories that are plot driven and not character driven, you know, like a mystery, I understand because it's got a beginning, middle, end, and it's got, you know, these obstacles. You got to figure out what's going on, and then it ends. You know, like the story ends once it's solved, right? Or, you know, I think another thing that comics contributed to cinema, mostly television though, is we used to watch a TV show and you would get it done in one story, right? Usually. And then you follow the characters throughout, and the characters didn't really change much. It was the stories that kind of presented an issue or problem and solved it by the end of the episode, right? But now TV is a season. They see the whole, you know, at the beginning of the story or the first few episodes, and they little by small kind of go through these obstacles and till finally the bigger overarching story is resolved mostly by the end of season 1. But then there's a little bit of a dangling carrot to get you to season 2 or and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and with Marvel, as we all know, it's the unending story. You know, they managed to transition TV into their movies, you know, like the whole Thanos thing, like, was it like 24 movies that made up that entire story, you know, ending with that movie, you know, like that's bananas. They were able to pull that off, you know, and now they're doing a next arc, I guess, with Kang and maybe the Fantastic Four and whoever else, right? And DC hasn't figured that out yet, you know, how to do that. And I think they're going to try and follow that lead with James Gunn. But anyway, yes, a character versus plot is an interesting conundrum sometimes.
Can you share a little bit with us about how your process for going from idea to story to finished book?
Man, you know, some people have said that when you know the ending of a story is how you write to it, right? That's how you can then figure out your beginning, middle, because you know where you're going, right? And I've done that a couple of times, but honestly, it's boring to me. What I like is to start right at the very beginning and then figure out what happens next, right? Like, and then midway through, you start realizing, okay, this happened, this happened, this happened. Somehow I went left and then went right and up and down. And then you're like, but I've noticed that there's, you know, if you're a good enough storyteller, instinctually, you're starting to like figure out that you're getting to an ending. So then you figure out where you're going at the end of this, how you're going to cap it off. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the kind of way I like to work. I also like, you know, because it's a visual storytelling medium, think of something that's visual. You know, like you know, listen, we all love to write a great sentence or piece of dialogue or a caption or whatever, right? But that's actually secondary to comics. Comics are visual first. So what I prefer, if I can get away with it, is to be able to draw something and then figure out the dialogue, if there even needs to be dialogue. The problem is when I've had to pitch to editors at comic book companies, usually for their characters, you can't really do that. You need to let them know what the idea is before they can approve it. Then you can flesh it out, right? And then maybe you can throw some curveballs and come up with a better idea once you're visualizing it, and then talk to the editor and say, hey, guys, listen, I have to change this because look what I came up with, you know, like if given the latitude, you know. But I think when I did a Billy Dogma comic on Activate, that's how I wrote it. I drew it first. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And so for a week, if you were trying to figure out the cliffhanger, so was I, you know, and it energized the work a little bit better, and it made it more fun and interesting to read and to create.
That's very telling because FYI guys, Dean is the first guest we ever had who did not want to see the questions ahead of time.
Yeah, no. David, you had a question?
Yes.
I was going to thank you for what you're sharing, by the way. It's really encouraging because I struggle in the same way. I feel like I got to this point now where you get to this point as an artist, that as a comic book artist, that you just feel confident with drawing from your soul, but it doesn't lend itself to pitching. So like I have a day job and I do and I
Yeah.
spare time, but I thought a lot about this. Like one day I would love to live off comics. And I guess the question I want to ask you is, have you ever consider the idea that maybe the pitch is different than what you do? Like I always imagine that maybe sometimes just like you, I'll start off with a drawing and then build off of that, like just let it flow from my soul. But I imagine that when you pitch, that's my experience with work too. They like to follow some sort of very rigid, very corporate process, but so there's a difference. And I think Donald Glover did that when he pitched the show Atlanta. He told him one thing, but did something totally different.
Right. And then he did it well enough. They were like, okay, go for it. Right.
Yeah.
I guess. Right. But
And
it's
same thing
funny
for Walking Dead.
Oh,
Wait.
wow.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he pitched that there were aliens involved.
Oh,
and
right.
After a while,
but they
there were
want
no
to
aliens.
know.
They asked him, "Were they aliens?" Oh, I just made that up.
Yeah, they wanted to know where this all happened from, so we had to give them a quick answer. So two things. One is you have to remember that in comics, image is text, right? So for a long time, I didn't feel confident as a writer at all because I felt like I can maybe draw, but I can't write. And then I realized, wait, I am writing through the drawing. And I am a co-writer with the person that's actually, come up with the story first, right? But when it comes to, I think like, I remember working on a pitch with Mark Waid, right? And it's something I still love to do. It's a Superman Batman idea that I initially came up with, but then I got stuck and I said, Mark, can you flesh this out? And he was brilliant because he's a genius. But part of his genius is to leave some things open. Like he'll actually say, and then, this thing kind of happens. We'll figure that out later. And then we get to, because he knows that there had to be a point where you go from A to B or B to C, but then he didn't figure it out in the pitch. But when he was going to, if you were to sell it, then he'll do the work of figuring it out, right? And also because he thinks visually too, because there are not too many comic book writers that also think visually or let the artist, bring their A game, right? So he's also really good at doing that. But it's funny because when I've actually worked with Mark, I did all the plotting of the entire story and I drew it. And then I would send him like all the artwork. It was like on the Fox, right? For Archie. I send him the artwork and my plot notes. And then he would like over lunch write the dialogue for 24 pages, something like that. But that's how good he is, and he would add finesse to that and like, flavor. But and that's where it gets to be fun for a writer too. I mean, that's a lot of what Stan Lee was doing back in the day. He was kind of like a showrunner, right? Like after a while, he was like spinning 11 different plates, right? Between the, Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. And like, so he didn't have time to like sit down and type an entire script. He relied on his artists to convey those stories. So there might be a note or there might be half a page written of a story plot, whatever, right? And so that's where the debate comes in of like, how much did he write or didn't write? Like, I get it. I understand that Jack Kirby basically wrote the FF, right? Or at least plotted it out, and he had a lot of great ideas. But of course, he spoke to Stan Lee a little bit, at least early on. And then so did Steve Ditko, until Steve was just handing in, this is what's happening next. And that lifted the burden from Stan Lee. And whatever, despite the debate about, the Marvel method and who did what, I like that idea as a comic book writer, is that you don't have to spell everything out, especially when it's a collaborative medium like that. Now, yeah, you could be doing your own thing, but it is good to like tell your idea to somebody else, because it helps bring story clarity. It's like telling a joke. You only get better at it the more you tell it, right? So.
Question from Michael.
Hi, Dean. We go actually pretty way back.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what comic you did that I was involved. Like, I remember something from back in the day. What was that?
That was the Next Door Neighbor project.
Oh, Next Door Neighbor, of course.
Yes,
Wow.
for Smith. Yeah, it's great to see you and hear your story more. And
yeah, man.
I'm actually just moving to Brooklyn this coming May from LA. I've been out there as a storyboard artist and
Oh,
still
cool.
still self-publishing all these years.
Awesome.
Um,
You have to swing by the
yeah.
studio.
I would love to. I would love
Yeah,
to.
man.
Actually, my fiance is living. She works right on Union Street over in Gowanus.
Oh,
Funny enough.
awesome.
So yeah, so
Awesome.
I'm over there quite a bit picking her up.
Oh, cool. Cool.
I wanted to ask you, do you have interest in adapting anything? And what's your thoughts on adapting stuff into comics? Because I feel like
Right.
comics is so open to that, you know, being a visual form. And I'd love to hear if you ever thought about that and where you might want to go with that.
Right. So thank you. Thank you for the question. So I have adapted something. I adapted a Goosebumps story called Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, R.L. Stein, right? And it was at a time when I needed a job. I got offered this gig and I had to take the entire like 119-page book and break it down into a 40-page comic, I think, that was going to be part of a 3-part graphic novel where there was going to be 3 Goosebumps stories, right? And they did a few of these books. But damn, Char, you're making me tired with that yawning. Okay. But I did do an adaptation. I also feel sometimes, and this is a very loose thought, sometimes when you get a very surgically written script, that you're kind of adapting that even though you're the artist on it, right? Like, because you have to like use some of the same tools, even though you're originating a lot of what it's going to look like or the design or whatever, right? But this is what I really feel. I feel like I don't want to adapt anything unless I was so infatuated with that story. Like, I don't know, just pick something that kind of famous or something, right? And then you go, well, I want to do the graphic novel version of that, right? I was offered recently a YA series that's huge in terms of prose, and it just blew up and was big time, and they milked all that money out of the prose version. And then like, what happens next? Let's do the comic book adaptation, right? So you get somebody like me or you, whoever, to do all the work of adapting something, because trust me, the writer doesn't want to do that necessarily. They want to just get paid, right? You do this adaptation, it comes out. Who are they talking about? Not you. Oh, look, the writer. And then now they did a comic book version, and they might mention like the artist, or maybe, oh, if it worked or didn't work. That's a whole other thing. I remember Quentin Tarantino was once asked, why didn't he do, what was it, Luke Cage or Friday the 13th or something where it was a pre-existing IP, right? And he's like, because everyone's going to tell me how I did it wrong. Now, you cannot like Kill Bill, but you can't tell me I did it wrong because I created Kill Bill or I created these other stories and characters. Again, you cannot like it, but you can't suddenly be telling me, you know, you did Silver Surfer wrong, or you did whatever, you know, like, and I get that, you know, and I don't mind the challenge of an adaptation. I just feel like, luckily what happened is that I had enough stories that I still want to tell and originate myself, you know, and God bless people who can adapt and take on that job, and they just want to draw. And I don't mean just draw, you know what I mean? But like, they're okay with the removal of that kind of an ego that I still have, you know, as a creator, you know.
It's funny. It's always, I guess it seems greener on the other side of the garden, because we had another writer in here a year or so back, and he does mostly adaptations, and I loved his work, but he really lamented, he wished he could come up with do something creator owned, even though
Creator-owned.
he was doing a lot of really good work in the doing adaptations of established properties.
I mean, you can get paid well. I honestly, in comics, unless I had like some kind of amazing agent and the publisher had a lot of money, like, it's just a lot of work. And nowadays they want things to be 200 or 300 pages, you
Mhm.
know, and like, I don't know, man, it's a whole other system, you know, than what I'm used to. But I come from a time when you could pick up Marvel 2-in-1 and you got an epic story in 22 pages, you know?
I don't have a question, but I just want to point something out, or just bring something up really quickly. David White earlier said that he wishes he could make a full-time living off comics, right? And I gotta tell you, I've done that very briefly, and I didn't like it.
Really?
You know, because not only am I drawing stuff that are not my own work,
Mm-hmm.
but I was working 16-hour days. I had no life, and I was getting paid $100 per page, right?
Yeah.
And it was taking me a day and a half to do a page. So if you do the math, you can't live off of that.
Right.
Dude,
know,
I recently got offered. Yes, someone last week offered me $100 a page to write, draw, and color.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, and I trust me, you cannot know who I am or what I've done, but really, like maybe someone who's still in high school or just in college, or like, it's not about the money, it's about the work and training,
Right.
just getting something under your belt, right? But like, it just felt insulting, like, and I just felt like I didn't want to pull the "do you not know who I am" card, because I'm not anybody next to like the people that I love, right? Like, and again, it's not classist, it's not anything like that. It's just like, but I have done a lot of work, like I've done a lot of book, and like, why? How do you think? And by the way, it just takes me longer to write and draw these days. Well, maybe more draw than write, because I'm getting old, man, and like I'm hunching over an art table. I never developed that like skill that would allow me to draw a monthly book. I don't know how those guys do that. That's really hard, you know.
David, I think having a regular job, so you have to worry about, so that comic books is not the work, but the passion.
Yeah.
You know, the thing you love to do.
Right
And
now,
that's
you're in
what-
a
that's-
sweet spot, David, of being in passion, because when it becomes a job,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
that could like cripple you or just be like mess you up, you know, or you learn how to do comics that way. I'll tell you, this COVID Cop Kickstarter that I'm doing, you know why I'm doing it right now?
Why?
I don't have a job.
Oh, yeah.
I've not
Right.
been paid in 3 months
Yeah.
because I didn't have any work lined up, and it's been tough, COVID, all this stuff, right? Pandemic. So I had written this thing in 2020, and I showed it to a bunch of publishers, and they all, the publishers I showed it to said, "This is really good. We can never publish this." I was like, "Why?"
Wow.
It's called COVID Cop. COVID is, nobody wants that word, like, and I get it. And maybe even today still I get it, you know, but you know, I'm trying to do what like Judge Dredd does or Toxic Avenger. It's like, you know, we create that anti-hero that kind of brings a little bit of levity to the seriousness, right? And also create an anti-hero that responds to the darkness in the world, right? In some way. I'm just doing something that's traditional, and if you think about it. But I had to invest my own little bit of savings I have. You want to know what dinner is? It's not even Skippy. It's this, man.
Oh,
And
man.
and
Jeff
my
is
dad
good.
got me this.
I like Jeff
It's
better than
okay. I
Skippy.
like Skippy better.
Is it? Wait a minute. The question is it creamy or crunchy?
I don't like crunchy, man. Not with
I don't
my
like
teeth,
crunchy. It's gotta be
you know,
creamy.
like, it's gotta be creamy. But dude, man, I'm tired of peanut butter, you know, but I do what I love, right? Well, then at this age, I better at least like
Dude,
what I'm
I don't like crunchy peanut butter. I prefer smooth peanut butter.
doing, right? Preach.
Maybe we'll do a poll at the end of the talk. Hey, you know, since you're being frank, there's a question I wanted to ask you about, but I wasn't
Yes.
sure if you know if it was something. And you feel free to say I want to talk about that, right? I was talking to another established professional a year or so ago, and we were talking about doing this project, and we're talking about who to shop it around with, and he said that he doesn't like the image contract. He said the image contract sucks.
All right, so what you're asking is that you pitched.
What do you think of the image contract?
What do I think of the image contract? Right.
And maybe share a little bit of what an image contract is like, because I'm sure a lot of people are curious about that.
Well, I think
A lot of
think
people
that-
say they just want to get published by Image. So
Well, you got to think about what that actually means, because I was actually thinking about this, and I'll answer the contract thing in a second, or a version of my answer. Is if the big two are Marvel and DC, right? Because they've been at it for years, and they have, you know, relationships with printers and distribution and IP and so on and so forth. I get that they're the big two. So then what's being touted or suggested is that Image might be the third biggest publisher in print comics, right? Which is probably true. But then I started thinking about the ecosystem of Kickstarter. Kickstarter publishes a lot of comics or funds a lot of comics, right? And I'm wondering if Kickstarter is actually the third biggest publisher. That's just something to think about. Anyway,
I've heard that. Yeah.
but in terms of a contract, like they take a tiny cut off the top and that's it. So I don't remember how much it was, but let's say, I don't remember what it was for the books,
No.
but I do think like if you do an issue of a comic, and let's say it's a mini series or something, right? I feel like they take like $2,500, like $2,500 to do the printing, the grunt work, the office, the this, the that, right? So that if your comic, like look at Walking Dead, at first it didn't do great, and then it's little by small caught on, then it became a TV show, and it continued to do well enough. Like, and that's a black and white comic, so actually production costs a little bit less than a color comic, right? In terms of coloring and printing color, except for the covers were color, I think. Anyway, but that's not a lot of money to ask for. Now, if the comic does well, you do well. If the comic isn't being ordered because most comic shops might order one copy and then thank God that they sold it and never think to order another copy because it's sold, then you're dealing with some kind of like retailer issue. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that I think it's a pretty fair contract, especially since they do a lot of work. You go through their stuff. Now, the issue is this, that I believe at one point Image might have been publishing 40 number ones in a month, right? How's a retailer supposed to, a copy of each issue? So you have to pick and choose, right? And most retailers are curating their shelves, mostly with Marvel and DC or what they think is going to sell. And then they have to try a new book, an indie book. Does it look good? Is the cover cool? Is it written by someone or drawn by someone I've heard of before? What's the title? What's it about? And there is a lot of work, I think, that goes into a retailer trying to figure out hundreds of titles a month, right? And what they think might sell. So I don't know what the person that you talked to, what kind of contract they were shown, but I feel like it seems like it's a fair enough deal, and if it doesn't do well, it really comes down to orders. And to be frank, if you're going to do a mini series today in today's market, you know that the first issue is going to sell the best because people are going to try out the beginning. Second issue, usually things fall about half in terms of numbers. You're not even getting to the fourth. By the fourth issue, you're losing money for sure. Usually, you know why? Wait for the trade. They know that eventually you're going to collect that thing anyway, right? And even Marvel and DC have a tough time with miniseries or just trying to get a story arc out there and wait for the trade, right? That's what starts to happen. Or go on Comixology or whatever it is and just read it that way and don't fill your room with all this paper, So I don't know. I felt like it was a fair enough contract, even though I don't even think my 2 Red Hook books broke even, to be honest. But also it came out once a year. They did a little bit of press, but mostly you have to do your own PR,
Right.
And that's another thing. Like you get the Image stamp, and that goes only so far. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's another reason why people want to publish with Image is because people at least know what Image comics are, For a long time, I wanted to be published by Fantagraphics at one point, I love or drawn in quarterly, but that's not the kind of comics I do, not necessarily, And even they don't do, Fantagraphics doesn't publish the kind of comics I read in the 90s, like Minimum Wage. The last comic they do like that is Love and Rockets, They don't do Hate, Peter Bagge doesn't do Hate, Jessica Abel doesn't do Art Babe, I mean, I miss that era, that time. I wish we still had those kinds of comics,
I think this person was comparing the Image contract to contracts from traditional book publishers like Random House and Scholastic, and where they do a lot more. They're more involved in the production and the promotion. So
yeah, they do a good job with production. You can I can just send my pages in, and they have great people putting these together, and it always looks good. And then, but it comes to PR, I don't think they have as robust, people working on that. They're probably selling more Image than they are your comic book. right? They'll get that first issue. Like they flew me out to an Image convention where I got to talk about my comic, you know? So, and I don't think I had to pay for that. I think that came out of pocket, you know? So they did me right. It's just that I was coming out with a book once a year for something that's already online for free, if you think about it, you know? So
I just realized we really haven't been taking questions from a lot of the attendees. So if anybody else has any questions, let us know now. Anybody else? Okay, I got more questions then.
right.
Let's do two more and then we'll wrap it up.
all right, cool.
Between digital comics, AI, and other upheavals in the industry, where do you think indie comics will be in the next few years?
Indie comics will be more Kickstarter comics. And I know I'm saying that because I did a Kickstarter, but that's probably why I did a Kickstarter, because I feel that it's very indie. But also a lot of small publishers like Rocket Ship, a lot of publishers are kickstarting their comics. That's how they are publishing, you know, they're using Kickstarter. So I think Kickstarter is going to continue to grow indie comics, and when we say indie, we're talking about non-franchise, right? But I also think that a lot of indie creators want to have their own franchise, right? Like
I think
they
that's a
want to build
dream.
out, right?
I
And
mean,
then like,
everybody wants to come up with a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
or something, and then they're not thinking. Often I think a lot of people aren't thinking about the comic book. They're thinking about how's the comic book going to become attracted to Hollywood to become a TV show or a movie, right? And that's fair, but also like let it be a comic book first. One of the things I'm doing, and you mentioned AI, is in my campaign right now for COVID Cop, the Kickstarter, is to not show a lot of it online, and I'm not going to make a web comic out of COVID Cop, not now, because of AI. It's a little bit of a protest, a little bit, and a little bit of like a stance. Where listen, I get it. I have so much stuff out online, and that we all just surrender every day when we post something, that eventually, yes, it's going to collect all this, they're going to mash it up, and they're going to make whatever the AI decides, right? The issue isn't necessarily that, because that's fun stuff, that's weird, it's cool, psychedelic, it's, you know, surreal, right? But the issue is when it takes jobs away from people. Like you know, when someone comes up with an idea and they want to like workshop it, you hire people to workshop ideas. Well, now you can just type some stuff into an AI engine and they'll do a version of it for you. That's good enough, or maybe even better than what if you would hire some people, you know, depending, right? So that's the only worry, is that it really is going to start taking away, and has taken away, jobs, I think. And that's what was kind of interesting about NFTs. Even though I never did an NFT, I feel like one of the concepts I was told about NFTs was that if I was to sell like a piece of original art or a painting, let's say, to you, Ramon, and then you had it for 5 years over your kitchen table, and then you decide, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this painting, I'm going to sell this. And let's say I was famous enough that you could get like double what you paid for, right? When you sold it to someone else, if it was an NFT, what I think is built into the back end is the idea that you, the artist, get a royalty from that sale, right? That's pretty cool. I don't know how that's going to still work out in the future of stuff, but I don't know. We've been handed the tools. This makes movies, comics. I mean, it's crazy, right? This little gadget, right? That your destiny is in your hands, literally. You know, sometimes when people ask me, "What do you do?" I was like, "My comic is in your pocket right now." Like literally, you just have to type a couple of things in, and you'll access my work for free. You know, but that's the problem. Is twofold: how to monetize your work. We're always trying to figure out how to sell. Okay, but even more so, how can I get your attention and steal your time? You know, woo you into wanting to spend time with my work or me or whatever, right? Because our time is constantly being spent by breaking news, you know, what Michael had for lunch, you know, like whatever, like it's insane. And we're all guilty of it, and we're all, you know, kidnapped by it in a lot of ways, you know. So
Great. That's great insights there. Anybody else? Any other question? I'm gonna ask the last question now, okay? So, Dean, I know your latest project is COVID Cop. Tell us a little bit about that and how people can support it.
Oh, thank you. So COVID Cop was, again, I was saying, was born in like the ides of the virus in 2020. I had worked on another kind of pandemic project where with the Red Hook, where I wanted to honor, remember at 7 o'clock, people would clap, you know, for
Right.
the first responders and everybody. I wanted to do a comic about that. And I did a short Red Hook story for an anthology called Pandemics that you can buy for $5 at the Hero Initiative. It's 64 pages, a bunch of different artists and writers responded to the pandemic in that anthology. But also I wanted to have fun with another character, as I mentioned, this COVID Cop idea that I tried to pitch, didn't sell, put it to the side, had other work, finishing up like the last season of Red Hook and Webtoon, and then got some other gigs and did a play and wrote and directed a short film and stuff like that, right? But then when recently, 3 months ago, I realized I had no work ahead of me. I dusted off COVID Cop, and basically it's a character who's his name is Lincoln Bio, which sounds familiar to a lot of us when we're trying to. It's Lincoln Bio, right? But link in bio.
Right.
Okay, that's me. Like what I did with the Red Hook and naming characters after places, right? Like I like to have fun with that. And he is an officer who, well, during a time where we didn't find a cure, all right, and a lot of people did die and are dying, and it takes place about 10 years from now. And the story that I portray is in Gowanus, a decade from now, and 98% of humanity has been wiped out by this virus, okay? And what you find out is that the cops' jobs were changed to a new mandate. Rather than saving people, they were there to basically make sure that people were infected, because the government felt that the worst thing that happened to Earth is mankind. And it's better to wipe us all out to try to save the planet because of, it's a little bit of a commentary, right? But then Lincoln Bio, my hero, discovers another path and a way to save people. And one of the things he does is something that I do, and I know a lot of my studio mates will either buy bottled water or filtered water, is I drink from the Gowanus, I drink the tap water, right, in the neighborhood. And it's famously known for being toxic and has, they found syphilis and dead bodies and gangsters and I feel like it creates certain immunity in me, right? So I wanted to give him that trait, and then he discovers, oh, I know how you fight the virus with something even worse, and it's also about his ex-wife and these awful people that are in the story. They've weaponized the holiday, so there's like a bad Santa. There's a Easter bunny with a chainsaw. I mean, and there's also these other kind of military. It's a lot of fun. It's pretty absurd. It's goofy, and yeah, I was able to make my initial goal the first 3 days of the Kickstarter, and but all that does really is to pay for the printer and the U.S. mail and for the packaging, right? So I was able to get that, but now I want to pay the creator. So I'm hoping to raise funds. I'm at a little bit over 10,000 right now. If I can get to 15,000, then I can recoup my investment, right? And be able to get back to zero, at least for my bank account, and pay back what I invested. And if we get 15,000, I'm gonna there's a stretch goal where you can get a can or a bottle opener that has a COVID Cop kind of thing on the cover. So it's a lot of fun, and hopefully some of y'all will check it out.
So
It's
if you
really
go to
fun.
Kickstarter and we do a search for COVID Cop, we'll find you.
COVID
right?
Cop or Dean Haspiel, and that's it. It's right there.
Okay, I lied. I just noticed that Paul had a question on the board, and I really
All right,
would
sure.
love to hear that answer.
Okay.
Do you have any regrets about getting to comics? I think that's a great way to end the conversation.
Sure. Regrets. I mean, I think everybody has regrets about stuff, right? But is it because of comics, right? I think that's I don't know, because do I regret not having, my initial dream was to like work for Marvel, right? On a regular series, right? And then when I realized I wasn't good enough, or who knows what it's about, you know, maybe it's just the luck of the draw or whatever. What it did allow me to do is to double down on finding out more of who I am as a writer and an artist. So, you know, would I found that way by working at, you know, Marvel on a regular series? I don't know. But I hazard that I became more interesting, probably, hopefully, because it was a more of a struggle. And I know that, you know, the joke is, oh, you have to be in pain in order to make art. I don't know if I make art, you know, I don't know. Let someone else decide that, right? And I don't want to suffer, and I don't want to eat peanut butter sandwiches, but I also don't care about having enough money to own a yacht either, you know? But maybe I've trained myself to never think that way. Or maybe if I did think that way, maybe I'd be more successful. I don't know what you put out there, right? All this stuff. Regrets, I'm sure I have some regrets. Did I make some choices that maybe, you know, in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done that? I think we all do, but you know what? You learn from those. So it's not like I want to have a squeaky clean path where everything I made was right. And, you know, no, you gotta make mistakes in order to learn from them, you know? So maybe I don't have regrets. I just honor the fact that I've made a lot of mistakes.
Hey, Paul, I don't have an answer, but I have a saying, and my saying is, I want all my regrets to be of things I've done, not things I haven't done.
There you go. There you go.
Because you're gonna have regrets no matter what, right? But might as
Right,
well be
exactly.
because you
exactly.
went for it rather than not went for it. So.
That's right. That's right.
With that, I would like to thank Dean for coming. I would like to thank all of you for showing up. And we have this recorded since I get a chance. I'll try to get it up sooner than later because I know that we want to promote you or help promote your COVID Cop Kickstarter.
Thank you very much.
And
Thanks,
Michael,
Ramon.
when you come out to New York, make sure you get in touch.
Well,
There's a bunch of us that like to hang out together every once in a while.
let's
Yeah,
do it.
Michael.
Definitely, you can.
Great to see you, Dean.
Welcome to join us,
Good
and
to see you
anybody
guys.
else too. Okay, thank you very much,
Thanks,
everybody.
Ramon.
Dean,
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
Bye,
you.
guys.
See you later.
I'll come by one of these days.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Char.